Hello and welcome to the Lewiston Tribune podcast. This is episode number 4. I'm Matt Baney, the interim managing editor of the Tribune, and I'm here today with Eric Barker, who is our outdoor and environmental editor. And Eric has written a really nice story on Silas Whitman, who was a Nez Perce tribal member who died recently. And Silas, if you read Silas's obituary that his family submitted, so he did a lot of things in his life. He was an interesting guy. But Eric's story is specifically about his part in helping salmon runs come back to the area. And he was involved for many years with that effort. Tell us, Eric, how did you decide to write this story and this angle that you took on it? Kind of tell us how that all came together.
Well, so I knew that Silas was a former member of the tribe's fisheries program. They call it the Department of Fisheries Resources Management. And he led the department at sort of a really important time. And I wanted to, so I knew of that, and I found it interesting, and I had a suspicion that he sort of really led the drive to put in place some of the policies, the goals, and the ambitions that led to some of the good things we see in salmon and steelhead in the Snake River Basin today. And, the two big ones, of course, are the Hatchery Fall Chinook program and the Hatchery Coho program. Those provide very popular fisheries in the fall to this day. And even in my 25 years here, more than 25 years here at the Tribune, that wasn't the case. And so I sort of had that background, but I wanted to know more about it. I didn't know it really well. So that was the whole idea behind the story. I reached out to David Johnson, who is now the director of the tribe's fisheries department, and asked him if we could have a conversation about that, and sort of a look back at Silas's involvement in fisheries. And he was really enthusiastic about it. He kind of put together a group interview with himself and some other folks. And that's where the story comes from.
And were you, like you suspected that Cy was kind of on the ground floor of this? Turns out he pretty much was. The fishery department that the tribe had was really nothing to speak of when he joined it. Is that right?
Yeah, it was pretty small. It did exist. There were people who led it before him. I believe he was the first Nez Perce person to head it, and I think in the story, I think David Johnson told me it was maybe a dozen people at the time that Silas Whitman took over, and by the time he exited, it was probably over 200 people. It might be bigger than that even today. So yeah, he really did kind of lay some groundwork and foundation. And build up that department.
And it really is the fisheries that you talk about are probably some of the brightest spots in terms of the salmon and steelhead picture these days, right?
Yeah, salmon and steelhead runs are sort of perpetually going. They perpetually go up and down. Mm-hmm. The wild runs that we're most concerned about, the ones that are listed under the Endangered Species Act, well, they go up and down year to year. The general trend is down. Now, for coho, they were wiped out. They were extinct, gone from the Snake River Basin. And the tribe had the opportunity, the desire, and then they got the opportunity to try to restore them. And they did. It took a long, long time, decades to do, but they did it. Fall Chinook, they were not doing well in the Snake River Basin. They were eventually listed under the Endangered Species Act. And there was, a hatchery program for them in the Snake Basin, but not above Lower Granite. It was largely Lyons Ferry hatchery. and the tribe. I'm not exactly sure how much Silas Whitman was directly involved in this, but he, again, built the program in which they really pushed for expansion of the Fall Chinook hatchery program above Lower Granite Dam. That was led by the tribe, so they put them in places like Hell's Canyon, and now in the Salmon River and in the Clearwater River, and we're fishing for them. People are fishing for them right now. It's starting to tail off. They return, starting in probably August, and they'll spawn here now this month.
It was interesting to read in your story that that there was some resistance to starting a coho program that Silas was part of, a hatchery program.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? Why would there be some resistance to trying to do that?
Well, I don't know the exact reason for. I mean, Idaho opposed it. They said they were worried about disease, like bringing in these coho eggs would bring disease into this watershed. The tribe kind of dismissed that as ridiculous. Definitely was some turf wars going on at the time. As I go into in the story, at the time that Silas took over, it was just sort of after some legislation and some important court cases that really started to give tribes in the Pacific Northwest and the Columbia River Basin some real power, some real funding to be genuine co-managers of fish and wildlife resources. So I think there was some bumping of heads, some turf war. Whether there was anything beyond that, I don't know. But the state of Idaho did apparently threaten to arrest anybody that brought coho eggs. The tribe bringing coho eggs into the state. Well, the tribe did it anyway, and organized by Cy Whitman, he found tribal members to go to the Yakima Nation and drive them up in their own cars. Now, there was no intervention at the border. There was no roadblock. But even after they brought them in, and for a while they're incubating them at Sweetwater, the state of Idaho, and I guess the state of Washington joined in too. They wanted those eggs to be destroyed, and now they sit down every year together and talk about how they're going to manage coho harvest, which is definitely not lost on some of the folks who are involved in those early tensions.
I think that's kind of an example that unless you're a longtime person paying attention to this, like yourself and others, that it's kind of, I haven't paid as close attention as you have, and to read that, it's kind of like, well, geez, why would they ever oppose that? Because now it seems like everybody's on the same page in that regard. So
yeah, that's right. It's kind of funny to think about. The tribe does. The Nez Perce tribe has a philosophy of supplementation, and that is using hatcheries to supplement wild runs that are having some trouble. That was controversial when they implemented it. It remains pretty controversial today. There are a lot of people who don't think you should be mixing hatchery genetics with wild genetics, even if the fish have the same genes, they come from the same stock. The idea is that when you move them into a hatchery environment, they sort of select for traits that make them survive in a hatchery environment better. And when you let those fish spawn in the wild, then they pass those traits on to wild fish and not the traits that help wild fish survive better.
And people who say that, do you think are they looking at it strictly from a biological point of view, or is there any philosophical point of view they use to object to that? I that's a tough question for you. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know about philosophical. Maybe a mix of some, but there is scientific arguments on both sides to be made. I mean, hatcheries are identified as one of the threats to salmon and steelhead. You talk about hatcheries, hydro, habitat, and harvest. The Nez Perce philosophy is, that was your hatcheries. You guys had this way of doing things forever and ever, just basically fish factory hatcheries. Yeah. We're going to do things a little bit better and manage them different, and we think the outcome will be different.
Yeah.
That, as I say, that is a robust scientific argument that exists to this day. And I'm not in the position to pick winners on that right now.
Another example of which also seems interesting, the fact that when the tribe started the Cherry Lane hatchery, that the Idaho Fish and Game was opposed to that as well. And is that a similar thing?
I think it's a similar thing. Probably some turf wars, some distrust that they had back in the day. Interestingly enough, they do get along pretty good today. They work together well. The state is an enthusiastic, participant in the fisheries for coho and fall chinook, and they work together, of course, on steelhead and spring chinook, and they work together to figure out, how many of each different kind of species is going to be produced in hatcheries. I mean, the Nez Perce have their own hatchery at Cherry Lane, and they manage the Kooskee hatchery on Clear Creek at Kooskee, and they're in charge of fish production at Dorshak National Fish Hatchery in Orofino. All this is governed kind of by a protocol called USV Oregon, where they have a series of meetings, and the state governments and tribal governments and the federal government kind of all participate in deciding, what's going to be raised where and what's going to be released where, and there's some harvest aspects to USV Oregon as well. And so for the most part, they get along pretty good, and at least much better than they did.
Yeah,
back in the day.
Some of the folks that you interviewed were Nez Perce people who Cy kind of is mentor the right word, or kind of maybe encourage them to guided them along in the fish hatchery business. And
no, I think mentored is probably an appropriate word. Recruit is a good one too. So when he took over, he had this vision of restoring these fall chinook and coho runs, of restoring salmon and steelhead habitat and salmon and steelhead runs throughout the basin. As listeners may know, the Nez Perce tribe have reserved in their treaty the right to fish at usual and custom places throughout their homeland. And so Cy didn't want just to have fisheries on the main stem, Snake, Clearwater, and Salmon rivers. He wanted fisheries in the tributaries too, and healthy spawning, and that's something the tribe and the state and other entities are still working to achieve. But in addition to that philosophy, Cy wanted the Nez Perce, just like he wanted the Nez Perce to be an active co-manager, he actually wanted Nez Perce people to be doing this as well. So he kind of recruited or encouraged people to work for the young Nez Perce people to work for the fisheries department. He started an intern program. People like Joseph Oatman, who's the deputy director now, started in that program. I think in 1992 he had worked 1 year for the Forest Service in fisheries, and then he talked to Cy, and Cy brought him in, and Jack Earout, the same thing. He's Joseph Oatman's deputy. So not only did he bring them in and give them experience in sort of the things that you would expect an intern to do, some of the grunt work, so to speak, but when he had these, high level, sometimes intense meetings with the state or perhaps with the feds, you would have these kids sitting next to him, and drinking it all in and absorbing it. And so they kind of talk about that in the story and say, even, we might not have understood. We're college students at the time and still studying fisheries, everything that was going on, but it sort of trained us or conditioned us to believe that, to know how to do it, to know how to interact and know how to hold your own, and to believe that you could do it. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. You interviewed Si some in your capacity. Of course, he'd been retired for quite a while. What interactions do you remember with Si? What was he like dealing with as a reporter, which is how you encountered him?
Yeah, I didn't have a huge amount of interaction with him. I remember shortly after I started going to a Northwest Power Council meeting up in, I think it was Coeur d'Alene, if I recall correctly, and he was there with a bunch of people from the Fisheries Department. They were still pushing for the Nez Perce Tribal Hatchery and different aspects of it. So I talked to him there briefly. One of the most memorable interactions I had with him, I wrote a story about the Nez Perce War and interviewed Silas and Leroy Seth just about their perspective on the war, what their elders who were involved in it passed down to them, and that was he was really engaging, really did a good job of telling the story and helping me to understand it in a way that I could explain it to readers. And
yeah, lest anybody think that he was only about fish and getting the fish runs back up. He was a really interesting guy to just read in his family's obituary. Mm-hmm. He was on the original LCSC Warriors baseball team in 1962. He was a boxer. Anyway, he did a lot in his life, so a really interesting guy. I think, Eric and I talked about maybe doing what we call a staff-written obituary, and I think he was worth it. Lots of other ways, it would have been.
I wish I had the obituary sitting in front of me, but he was a member of the Nez Perce Tribal Executive Committee. He was a past chairman of it. He worked in, I forget the exact name of the organization, but for a Native American organization in Washington, D.C. As David Johnson told me, he kind of came up through, he had very much of a civil rights background for Native Americans, and so that really kind of influenced him. And after he retired, he once ran this program, and after he retired, he went back to work for it. He worked, I think, at the Lostine Hatchery, which is a coho facility. He did some harvest monitoring for the tribe, and so he loved to be involved in fisheries.
One thing that you mentioned to me was that it seems in general, maybe anglers and guides, and they are maybe beginning, or maybe they have been aware of the role that the tribe played in helping some of the hatchery runs get back up. And I think it's true. Check me on this. It did seem like there used to be more tension about tribal members and their fishing rights, and non-tribal members maybe being resentful of those fishing rights. It seems like sort of like the state being kind of more on the same page with the tribe. Is that hopefully maybe the case with non-tribal
I think
anglers?
there's some examples of it. I mean, unfortunately, there's always going to be some knuckleheads out there. But I remember, for instance, it wasn't too many years ago that the tribe started doing some gill netting for fall chinook, coho, and some other things here on the Clearwater River. It's something they've done forever down in Zone 6 on the Columbia River. And when they started that, oh boy, there was a lot of tension, and I would get people calling me angry about it, just wanting to vent. And I remember people trying to organize boycotts of the casino, for instance, and just I don't know, crazy stuff. And and today it's on August 18th. If you go look out in the confluence of Snake and Clearwater River, there'll be 100 boats out there, and that's the opening of the fall Chinook salmon season. The tribe, the reason they're here is the tribe. They fought for, advocated, and moved the hatchery program up here, and it's been wildly successful. Same with the coho season, and that's also a popular fishery. I think probably the fall Chinook fishery is a little more popular, but I think people are catching on. We've tried to point it out. The tribe has done some netting in the confluence to this fall, and the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, Joe DuPont, who's the regional fisheries manager there, he has this huge email sort of newsletter that he sends out, and in that he has been telling people, hey, this is what's going on. They're going to have nets. It's going to be at night. It's cool. We can all get along. So he's really encouraged them and pointed out their role in bringing back fall Chinook and coho fisheries for fall Chinook and coho. So that's cool. It's encouraging to see. And then, recently for another story, I talked to Eric Holt, who is the chairman of the Nez Perce Tribe Fish and Wildlife Commission. And just an anecdote, but he said he was at the Flying J boat ramp, which is the boat ramp in North Lewiston. Of course, you have to have been around for a little bit of time to understand the Flying J. It's the name of the gas station. That's like 20 years old.
All our anglers and truck drivers know that. So
exactly. But anyway, he was. I can't remember what Eric was doing there, but he said he had his a shirt on that said Nez Perce Fisheries or Fish and Wildlife Commission. And somebody was like, hey, are you with the tribe? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, I just want to thank you. We just had the best salmon season we've ever had. And so it's cool to hear that people are starting to understand the tribe's role and rights in all of this. And, the tribe are about salmon. They want fish, as many fish as possible. So if you love fish, take a look at what the tribe is doing, for sure.
Here's a tough one. Without the tribe's efforts, without Silas Whitman's efforts, what do you think the fishery would look like these days if they hadn't been as proactive as they've been?
Well, specifically on fall Chinook and coho, we probably wouldn't be fishing for them. I mean, they wouldn't be here in enough abundance to fish for them. Now, to be clear, it's hatchery programs that have done it. The fall Chinook remain a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. The returns have been pretty good for a number of years. They're largely dependent on continuing that hatchery program, though. I mean, if you shut off the spigot of the hatchery program on fall Chinook, I think the numbers would drop dramatically.
Mm-hmm. Well, Eric, thank you. Thanks for the background on that. Nice work on the Silas Whitman story. Any other anecdotes kind of stand out? Anything else worth telling the readers about? They should definitely go check out your story, which is in Sunday's paper.
Yeah, I would just say go check out the story in Sunday's paper, and then, go fishing.
There you go. All right, thanks, Eric, and thanks for joining us on the weekly Lewiston Tribune podcast, and please tune in again next week. Bye.